first segment in our decking series.
Yes, indeed.
I was hoping you could talk just a little bit about building decks close to the ground, really low-level decks, and some of the conversations you have with clients about that.
There's a lot to think about with that. First off would probably be product. What are you planning? What do you want to have for a deck surface?
Sure.
How close you are to the ground, and deck product, there's a ventilation issue. And different products need more air circulation than others. So if you're talking one of the all plastic products like AZEK, then you can get pretty close to the ground and minimal air circulation, and you're fine.
Somebody's PVC product, they
Right.
perform.
Yeah.
They'll stand behind those.
Stick it in a bucket of water and nothing
Okay.
happens to it.
Okay.
But when you get into the capstock products that still have a wood component to them, even though they're encapsulated in plastic, they still can have a little bit of an issue with swelling. Some, not all products, but some products.
Yeah.
So they need more air circulation under there, and certainly a wood deck does also.
Yeah.
Put a wood deck right down to the ground with no circulation. In the Northwest, it wet all the time. You create an environment for dry rot to get going.
Okay.
It's not such a big problem in the other side of the mountains or other parts of the country, but here in the Northwest, dry rot's a big deal on this side of the mountains. So those are things we look at: is what's the product, how close to the ground am I going, and what can I do to create what, if any, kind of ventilation.
Okay. I know there's a lot of ways to go about this, but could you touch on just, you get that low, typical deck, you'd have a post and a beam and a joist and then your board. So, some of these decks are pretty darn low. So how do you typically frame them out?
Well, you don't have a traditional beam usually. I mean, or you can go with a really small beam. Like you can take a 4x4 post. You just have a lot of support posts coming off it down to the ground.
Okay.
Pull them in a lot closer together. But even then, that's still, you're still 9, 10, 11 inches off the ground. If you want to get any lower than that, you're actually building the framework. Within the framework, a beam system. So if you've got joists running and you're doubling up the ends of the deck, say it's a 10-foot long deck, the joists are running across it, but the two ends are doubled up joists. And that works like a beam. So rather than having a beam underneath it, the end of the deck is a beam. The deck gets longer than that. I might build it in boxes. So I've got a box here and a box here, and where they meet in the middle is a doubled up rim again, and I can post off of that. And that gets rid of the need of a beam underneath there.
Okay.
Get really close to the ground.
Yeah, okay.
Bearing in mind that gets you back into we talked about earlier, the tops of those joists and being flush and how that affects your decking. So when you start building in boxes, you've got a bunch of joists running into the side of a joist.
Yeah.
And it's got to be perfect. You got to spend a lot of time getting them all flush, and then the two that blend together flush, so that when you deck that thing, you don't have any aesthetic issues as far as humps or dips.
Okay, that makes sense. One thing I'd never thought about, you and I touched on it 6 months ago or so, was, gosh, if somebody's got their home and in the rim joist, they've got foundation vents, and that's where you've got to attach your rim potentially. Could you touch on sort of how you handle that and at least maintain that airflow that's critical to the crawl space?
You bet. And those over the years have gotten closer and closer together. It used to be you'd have 2 or 3 vents on the side of a house, but they've really tightened that up. A lot more air circulation under the house. So in a deck that's 20 feet long, you might have 3 vents,
that you
maybe
have to
4 that I have
around.
to frame around to attach to the house. So, and you can't block off the ventilation of the house. So the way we do it, and there's a number of ways you could go about handling that, but the way we do it is to frame around. In other words, normally when you're attaching a deck to a house, you're removing the siding, you're getting back to the subwall, and you're putting a vapor barrier and flashing and that type of thing. So most of your house vents today are like prefab. They're like a little wood frame with a screen
like a
stapled
1x2
to the
with
back
some
to it, and
quarter
that's
inch.
hooked to the sub house. So we try to leave those because they're in good shape. And then, but get to the subwall and paper it and flash it. Put our ledger in between. And then when we're joisting, your joists are going on a layout. It's either 12-inch or 16-inch on center for most decks.
Okay.
And so wherever we come to one of those, if there's one landing anywhere on that, we skip that one and just go over to the next one, which would be 32 inches.
Okay.
And we put all those in. And then we put something known as a header in between the two that are spanning either side of the vent.
So you sort of buck off between the
Right.
two joists
We'll
at
leave,
32.
we'll leave anywhere from 3, maybe 6 inches, depending on what we're using for decking. So we got the joists on either side of that vent. Now we put a header in. And so that's just another piece of framework that blocks in between so that I can run the joist that I left out into that header. So that I framed around it so that if you didn't have any decking on there, there'd be a space in front of the vent allowing for air circulation.
So now I've got, give or take, 30 inches by however much you left.
Right.
Okay.
That space allows for ventilation as long as you're off the ground a little bit. So that's the other thing would play a role with framing around that each of those vents is to make sure there's some kind of air circulation under the deck so that we've left enough of a space so there's enough off the ground so there's something going on there. You can't just put it down tight on the ground and deck it because it's just a hole with no air circulation.
Gotcha. I'm glad you brought up the whole ventilation thing again in your earlier comments about wood deck boards. You know, if somebody thought they were going to go with it, I think the one thing, even if you had a scenario where you had enough ventilation where a wood board would function, I don't think you could keep a finish on there. I think you have enough humidity pushing through the board at times of the year to just really hard. So if somebody wanted to pick maybe a modified lumber or even Western red cedar and just let it gray out, keep it clean, I think you'd be okay there. Or one of the PVCs you talk about. Or,
Right.
My question for you, Joel, is, you know, you're building this thing and you're not getting on your belly and crawling under this. I mean, it's kind of done, right? Once you're there, you're done. So could you talk a little bit about slope, grade, drainage, and then maybe also strategies for keeping growth, weeds or whatever grass growing up through your deck boards?
Sure. Well, a lot of ground level decks are going over existing patios.
Oh,
so the weed thing isn't an issue there, but there is a solution to that. I usually encourage the homeowner to remove vegetation, and then we put down a ground cover cloth. We'll spray it with something, we'll get it framed up, but we won't deck it. We put ground cover cloth, so we're not getting dirt on top after it's framed up, because that allows moisture to go through it, but it doesn't allow weeds to come up through it or grass. And if you're right on the ground, that is an issue. So you definitely got to do something, or the homeowner can do that themselves. We'll frame it up and leave it for a day, and they can go in there. They want to save a little money.
And I know we've seen it, you probably have too, where somebody's built over a waterproof membrane, maybe in a second story deck or something. And if it's not draining properly, you've got ponding water in there. And depending on the time of the year, it's just like a sauna. And that stuff can really make your building materials go bananas, you know, especially like potentially some of the capped stock products or even wood, right?
That's a whole other can of worms when you start building over the top of a waterproof membrane. Let me finish up on the drainage thing under ground level deck. Because say you are over a patio, you want to make sure that you haven't got some reverse slope thing going on, that the water isn't flowing back
towards the foundation.
Because now you don't see it. You don't know there's an issue. So you want to. Most patios are sloped away from the home, 1/4 inch to the foot, for drainage. But every now and then we'll get on a project and we'll be planning on going to the patio, but then we'll realize that there's a section that is reverse slope. It's settled down or something just from whatever time and whatever going on. And water sits back up there. Well, you don't want to cover that up. So that usually means that we're at least breaking out a portion of the concrete so that you can get back down to the ground, because there's drainage systems built in around the house, so we're not creating an issue of setting water back there nobody can see.
Wow. It's another great segment, man. I appreciate it. Thank you.